Everybody, welcome back. This is November 16th. It is a Thursday. Today we're going to kind of start reviewing the worksheet that we had you do in class yesterday. The burning question I should start off with is, what are some reasons people move in the 21st century? Like if you moved as a child growing up, or if you moved recently, what were some of those reasons that you have moved, or what would be some reasons that people would move? So I had you write some of those reasons down. And then I asked you to compare that to the 1920s, when some people moved for those same exact reasons, and then we went into some of those explanations as well. So just kind of get your answer down here and answer this question. But some of the differences we looked at were jobs, moving in different neighborhoods, different schools. You want to see, you want to move away from different neighbors because you don't like who you live next to. You want to get into a bigger house because your family is growing. Whatever it may be, you have different reasons as to why you move out. And some of those people move for the exact same reason in the 1920s. So what I want to do now is kind of go over different topics that we looked at on the worksheet. Number one, we went over a little bit yesterday looking at this idea of the flapper, how this image right here becomes what is known as the symbol of the 1920s. The fact that women changed so drastically in their visual changes that occur with women in terms of how we see from this to this definitely helps us understand why these changes were much more drastic for women. However, men also followed these changes as well, not to the fact that they dressed differently, but the fact that they paid more attention to the women who dressed like this instead of this. So that's that idea of how the flapper becomes a symbol, because this represents the amount of social change that does occur in the 1920s. And this is the biggest drastic visual change that we see is within women, from here to here. All right. Next we look at is the women's expectations of working in politics. How did their roles grow or diminish there, and what you found. For most people, women at work, they did get jobs. However, it was very difficult for them to move forward with those jobs. For instance, we read a story today in class about a woman who got a job at a publishing company, and she was promoted into her job. However, the problem was when she signed off on several of the works that she was kind of reviewing, she could not put her own name down. She had to put the initials of her name because no one wanted any of their clients to know that they were working with a woman in this position. When she went to her boss to talk about whether she could get even promoted even further as like a director, she was pretty much told directly that, hey, you can't become a director. You're a woman. What you should worry about doing is becoming a good secretary. And women were told that straight to their faces too. It wasn't like it was passive aggressive. They were said, no, you should work on becoming a secretary. Because that's all you'll amount to as a woman. And it's only because of them. So, but they're prejudiced in professional markets, with hospitals and law firms. They only become nurses or secretaries, specifically in hospitals and law firms respectively. Most of them are suited, at that time, most people assumed that clerical positions were better suited for women as secretaries, working for individuals. Telephone operators were a big role that women played. They received no further training in their jobs. If they wanted to improve their pay, they wanted to improve their hours, or whatever it might have been, they needed additional training to do that, and no company was willing to allow them to get that training because it would inflict a lot of negative correspondence on people moving forward, especially their co-workers who were male. Women got low wages compared to men. I believe the example I gave earlier about the woman who worked at that publishing company, the men who worked their jobs got paid $35 a week, while she got paid $22.50 per week, just because she was a woman. They worked the exact same jobs, did the exact same thing, but she got paid less because she was a woman. However, she did mention in the article that just because she had a job at first, which many women before her didn't have, she was happy to have that. Regardless of the pay, regardless of the treatment, she was happy to have that job. And again, as more and more things become limited for women, more and more opportunities become limited, women really don't take too kindly to that. And then finally, at the workplace, women were expected to quit once married and then pregnant as well. So these are the different areas that happen at work. Women do get work. They do have jobs. So you can put that off right down on the forefront. However, a lot of times they're limited in the expansiveness of how far they can go in their jobs. All right. Next, women in politics. When they voted, they did vote, but most women, when they get the right to vote, they don't show up to the polls, mostly because of these reasons. And some of these reasons are very identical to what people don't show up at the polls for today as well. Women who work in the rural areas or people who have very busy schedules need to strictly plan out their day and their trip to get to the voting polls. So something that takes about 5 minutes today, maybe a couple seconds back then, it's not worth taking time out of your day, especially a very busy day, just to go vote. So that's something that people really consider moving forward. Some women were uncomfortable voting. They didn't feel like they belonged. And it's, again, an idea of comfort, especially when voting is a public act. Back in the 1920s, people saw who you voted for, and sometimes that was enough to keep women away. Sometimes family pressure by parents, grandparents. Also the lack of interest. Most of the candidates women would vote for were men. They don't have any connection to those candidates, so they have a lack of interest. Understandably so, because many women didn't have any candidate they could really connect to on an individual basis. So it was something that many of them just didn't show up. I don't have a connection to this candidate. Why should I vote for him? All right, and again, this is kind of election day, what most people thought it was going to be, a woman going out to vote, while the husband, obviously out of his league when it comes to these duties that the woman was used to doing. But you can see that it is a major difference for the family at this point. And this is, again, cartoonists made these posters to show what is wrong with society when the women go vote, pretty much all chaos breaks loose in the home. Not always the case, however, this cartoonist definitely had a bias against women from voting. Now, number 3, looking at African Americans. What was the reason why they moved up to the north? Most of the reason was because African Americans wanted to escape the Jim Crow law, so they were pushed away from the South because of those reasons. Not pushed away by the society themselves, but because they didn't want to live there anymore. So it drew them away from those areas where Jim Crow occurred. And also, they were drawn in by new job opportunities in the northern cities as well. African Americans aren't the only ones, however. You don't have to add this to your answer, but I just want to mention that Mexicans and Canadians benefited from job increases in cities as well. Canadians especially going to the northern cities like Detroit, Chicago, Buffalo, probably Boston in some cases. They would go to these areas and they would do their best to find jobs there. And the Mexicans especially moved into major cities of Los Angeles, major parts of Los Angeles. So African Americans aren't the only ones to move, although African Americans are the only ones that do migrate from the southern part of the country to the northern part. Here, this is immigration essentially with Mexicans and Canadians. All right. Why do suburbs grow? Mostly for 2 reasons. First off, now that there's better transportation into the cities, you have bridges where you have walking paths, people can walk into the cities, and also buses. Also Henry Ford's creation, which helps out a lot with the car, at least the affordable car. Since transportation is easier, it's easier to get into the cities if you live outside of it. The second reason, and sadly this is a reality we have to face, that the growth of African American populations in these cities because of the migration from the south to the north of African Americans, many people who currently live in the cities didn't want these new neighbors. So when they saw them moving in, they moved out because they didn't want to live next to these families. And it's a harsh reality that we have to face in the 1920s, that even though the Jim Crow laws don't exist in the North, it's not the best situation for African Americans, at least not ideal, not the perfect world that they thought it would be in the North. So there's some issues there as well. All right, so that's through the first 4. Next, we talked about the heroes of the 1920s. Number 5, if you have this sheet in front of you, if you haven't gotten that sheet, make sure you print it out and download it on my Canvas page. If you go to my Canvas page, I'll cancel it out here, and you can go to 1920s, where it says units, the top right-hand box. At the very bottom of that page, scroll all the way down, and you will see the 13-1 Guided Reading Worksheet. If you download that, that'll get you some of those questions. And print that out, and you can get that sheet, and then you can answer. Number 5 talks about Charles Lindbergh. Why was Charles Lindbergh considered a hero? Mostly it was because he was the first person to fly across the Atlantic solo on a non-stop flight. I mean, no stops along the way. He flew from New York to Paris without stopping. It took him 33 and a half hours. And not only did Americans like his successes in flying, but he was also very humble, almost treated this trip as if it was nonchalant. It's no big deal. This is something that it wasn't that difficult, and Americans really related to that, and they really liked that Charles Lindbergh. Not only did he flew the first solo flight across the Atlantic from New York to Paris, but he made it seem like it was easy, and Americans really related to that idea, that story of Lindbergh getting across the Atlantic. And finally, the last part of those questions is who else existed as part of heroes at the time period. Amelia Earhart was a very big hero, especially for female pilots or for women at this time period who were trying to find a new way for their lives to go. Amelia Earhart presented that opportunity for women. You have sports stars like Jack Dempsey, Babe Ruth, Gertrude Darrell, Jim Thorpe. These are all big sports stars of the 1920s that really caused or had a lot of Americans pushing forward and really doing a lot for their lives to give them confidence. And not only are these sports stars individuals that bring up the professional sports world, but they also play a big role in creating recreational sports as well in the United States. All right, so you have the worksheet. If you go to Canvas, you download that 1 through 6. We go through all these answers here again. YouTube allows you to go back. You can get answers if you haven't gotten the ones, if you missed a couple of what I said. But the 1920s really changes up how society expects people to act. Women, men, sports stars, heroes, African Americans moving to the north. The society faces a drastic amount of change here in the 1920s, and most people can attribute to the idea that politics is going to let people make their own decisions and let them, not either suffer the consequences or reap the benefits of those decisions, as well as the economy is going to be primed for people to make a lot of decisions for their own personal and individual advantages. All right, so this is the social changes. Again, if you want to look at the differences of women, I have flappers here in the Roaring Twenties. I also have a video here as well I put up yesterday regarding the very beginning of a movie, the intro to the movie, which shows a woman going from an old school way of living to pretty much the 1920s flapper image. All right, so you have this idea. You have these videos, you can use these to help you answer the rest of the questions of the sheet. And that is all I have for you today, all right? If everyone have a fantastic day, I will talk to you later. I will see you. Bye.